"You're useless." David's voice was cold and unforgiving, like the snap of a twig underfoot. "You can't even give me what I need. You never could." The words hung in the air between us like a toxic fog. They were sharp, deliberate, designed to cut deep, and cut they did. I stood frozen in place, the weight of his words pressing down on me, suffocating me in the very place I once called home. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where love and warmth existed. But today, it felt like a prison. David was supposed to be the man I spent the rest of my life with. He was charming, intelligent, ambitious, a man who seemed to have everything in the world at his fingertips. We had been together for 7 years, married for 5. We built a life, a house, a future, or so I thought. But today, everything fell apart. "I've given you everything," David continued, his eyes cold and hard as they bored into mine. "My time, my love. And you can't even give me a son. Do you know how that makes me feel?" I felt a lump form in my throat. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now like ice. The man I loved, who I had sacrificed so much for, wasn't the man standing in front of me anymore. He had become a stranger, someone who valued me for what I could give him, not for who I was. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible, the tears welling in my eyes. "I tried, David. I really did." But my words meant nothing. His face hardened further, his expression set in stone. "Not good enough," he muttered. "You were never good enough. You're useless." I felt the world around me tilt, as if the very foundation of my life was crumbling beneath my feet. How had we gotten here? How had we gone from love and hope to this? How could I have failed him? The truth was, I had always known that David wanted a son more than anything. It wasn't a secret. It was the reason he married me. The reason he chose me. The reason I spent years going to fertility specialists, undergoing countless treatments, testing my body again and again, praying that somehow I could give him the one thing he wanted. But despite everything I tried, it never worked. And I began to feel like I was failing him in every way. "Why are you so obsessed with a son, David?" I had asked him once, in the early days of our relationship. He had just smiled at me, the kind of smile that made me feel safe and loved. "It's not just about a son, Rachel. It's about legacy, family. We're supposed to carry it forward." I had believed him. I had believed in us. But now, all that seemed hollow. It wasn't just the constant pressure to give him a child that had worn me down. It wasn't just the cold, distant treatment when the pregnancy tests came back negative, the nights when he slept in the guest room because I couldn't live up to his expectations. No. There was something else. Something far worse. Something I didn't see coming. It was Melissa. She was my best friend. The one person who knew everything about me. My confidant. My constant. She was the person I could call in the middle of the night when things got rough, when the weight of David's demands became too much to bear. She was my shoulder to cry on. She knew how much I wanted to make David happy, how I wanted to give him everything. But I never imagined that she would betray me. Never imagined that she would take the one thing I had left to give, the one thing I was still holding on to, and destroy it. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after David's hurtful words echoed through the house. I had been working from home, trying to distract myself from the growing tension between us. I had tried to call David that morning to check in, but his phone had gone straight to voicemail. He's probably busy at work, I thought. But then, as the clock ticked on and the day wore thin, something inside me urged me to check on him. The office door was locked, which was unusual. David had never been one to shut himself away, but I had heard nothing from him all day. And that's when I heard it. The faint sound of laughter. The familiar sound. It was Melissa's voice, mingling with David's, their laughter spilling through the crack in the door. "They're probably having coffee," I told myself, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. But as I moved closer, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "No, David, don't stop." Melissa's voice was low, almost seductive. My world froze. My feet felt like cement blocks as I stumbled back, unable to comprehend what was happening. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard. But no, the sounds were unmistakable. I pushed the door open with trembling hands, my body shaking with disbelief. There they were, David, my husband, the man who had promised to love me forever, and Melissa, my best friend. Together. In the most intimate way possible. Time seemed to stop. I stood frozen in the doorway, the words I wanted to scream stuck in my throat. It wasn't just the physical betrayal that cut deep, it was the emotional devastation. Melissa, who had known all my secrets, all my fears. The woman who had comforted me when David was distant. She knew everything about how much I loved him, how hard I was trying to make him happy. And she chose to betray me in the worst way. David's eyes locked with mine, wide with shock. But it was too late for apologies. Too late for explanations. The truth was standing there, staring me in the face. "Rachel, wait," David began, standing up from the bed, his face pale. "I can explain. This isn't what you think." I couldn't listen. My mind was reeling. The pain, the betrayal, it was suffocating. All I could do was shake my head. You betrayed me. Both of you," I managed to choke out. "After everything, this is how you repay me?" Melissa sat up in the bed, her face flushed with embarrassment and guilt. But there was something else there too, something darker, something more calculated. "I never meant for it to go this far, Rachel. But he needed someone who understood him. I didn't know how to stop it." I turned away from her, focusing on David, but my heart felt like it was being torn in two. "You're the one who said I was useless, David," I whispered, unable to hold back the tears. "And now I see I was right all along." David stepped forward, reaching for me, but I recoiled. "Don't touch me. You don't get to touch me anymore." For a long moment, the three of us stood in silence, the weight of everything crashing down around us. The hardest part about betrayal isn't the action itself. It's the realization that you were never truly seen. I couldn't remember when I had last breathed. Everything felt too heavy, too suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me stranded in a world of shattered promises and heartache. I stepped out of the room, my mind spinning, my feet moving instinctively. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to leave, had to get away from them, from the house, from the life I had built. The weight of it all threatened to collapse on me. But I couldn't stay. Not now. Not with everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and my best friend now in tatters. I didn't know where I went. I remember walking out the front door into the cold night air. The city was quiet, too quiet. The streets were empty except for a few cars driving past, their headlights streaking through the dark. My body felt numb, as though I were moving through a dream, unable to wake from it. The sharp bite of the wind against my skin did little to distract me. Nothing could distract me from the truth that was burning inside of me. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I couldn't understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. David and Melissa, my two closest people in the world, had shattered my reality in a way I couldn't even fathom. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the depth of it. They had both known how much I struggled, how much I yearned to make David happy. And they chose to break me in the worst way. Together. I walked aimlessly, tears silently streaming down my face, mixing with the cold. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything anymore. The person I had been, strong, supportive, loving, was slipping away, leaving only a hollow shell of who I thought I was. The world seemed to be closing in around me. I felt like I was suffocating in my own pain, unable to escape. I wasn't just grieving the loss of a marriage. I was grieving the loss of trust, of my self-worth, of everything I had believed in. I don't know how long I walked. I didn't think about the time. I just needed to put distance between me and the betrayal that was now festering in my soul. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of a hotel. I had no destination, no plan, no escape. I walked inside and checked into a room under a false name, desperate for privacy, desperate for a moment to breathe. As I closed the door behind me and sank down onto the bed, the weight of everything I was carrying threatened to crush me. I tried to calm my breathing, but my heart was still racing, my mind still reeling from the scene I had just witnessed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the storm in my mind, but all I could hear was their voices. David's apologies. Melissa's justifications. The echo of their betrayal reverberated in every corner of my brain, making it impossible to find peace. The silence in the room was suffocating. The stillness reminded me of how I had been living for years, quietly hoping, quietly trying, quietly dying inside, all while David's dreams and expectations took center stage. My voice had been lost, buried beneath the weight of his demands. All I wanted was to be enough for him, to make him proud, to give him what he wanted. But I wasn't enough. I never was. I wasn't enough for David when I couldn't give him the son he wanted. I wasn't enough when I couldn't live up to the vision of the perfect family he had in his mind. And now, with Melissa, I wasn't even enough for my best friend. She, who had stood beside me through everything, had crossed a line I never thought possible. But it wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just that she had slept with my husband. It was that she had known me better than anyone else. She knew my fears, my deepest insecurities, and still chose to betray me. She saw my pain, and chose to ignore it. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. I didn't want to look at it. But I had to. I knew who it was, Melissa. Her messages were filled with apologies, regret, and pleading. Rachel, please listen to me. I never meant for it to happen. I was shaking, but I couldn't stop reading them. How could you? I typed back, my fingers trembling with anger and hurt. How could you do this to me? A few minutes later, my phone rang. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether or not to answer. I knew what she was going to say. She was going to tell me that she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But none of that would ever change the fact that she had crossed a line, that she had been there for me when I was vulnerable, and instead of being the friend I needed, she chose to take something from me, something that could never be replaced. I pressed accept on the call. Rachel, please. Melissa's voice was frantic, filled with desperation. I never wanted this to happen. It was a mistake. I was weak, and David... Stop. I cut her off, my voice icy, distant. You don't get to apologize for this. You don't get to make this right. You've ruined everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her crying, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I don't even know who you are anymore, Melissa, I said, my voice trembling with emotion I couldn't suppress. I thought you were my best friend. And now you're just someone who betrayed me. Later that evening, I got the call from David. He had left me multiple voicemails, but I refused to listen. It wasn't until he called again, his voice pleading, that I answered. Rachel, please, I need to see you. I need to explain. I'm so sorry. I've been an idiot. I cut him off before he could continue. No, David, I whispered, feeling the rawness in my chest. You don't get to apologize anymore. You don't get to come to me with your lies. His voice cracked. Please, just give me a chance. I don't know what happened. It was a mistake, Rachel, a stupid mistake. I could hear the desperation in his voice. It made me sick. A mistake? I echoed, unable to control the bitterness in my words. This isn't a mistake, David. This is who you are. You've been lying to me, to both of us, for so long. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he would realize the depth of what he had done. But then he spoke again, his voice low. I never meant to hurt you, Rachel. I thought you'd understand. Understand? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You thought I would understand you cheating on me with my best friend? You thought I would just let it go? No, David, you don't get to make me the fool anymore. And with that, I ended the call. I didn't want his apologies. I didn't want his empty words. What I needed was the truth. And the truth was that he didn't see me, not really. He never did. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion, but above all, a quiet realization that I had to let go. I had to walk away from the man who had once been my world, and the best friend who had stolen everything from me. I spent the next week at a small rented apartment, far away from the house David and I had built. The space was small, almost claustrophobic, but it was mine. For the first time in years I was free, not from the pain, but from the expectations that had weighed me down. The emotional battle was far from over, but as I sat in that small apartment, alone but beginning to feel something close to peace, I realized that I had already begun the most important journey of all, the journey back to myself. Healing doesn't happen overnight, it happens piece by piece, when you least expect it. The first few days were the hardest. The apartment I had rented felt cold and empty, but it was mine. It was a space where I could finally begin to breathe. I spent my time staring at the walls, sitting in silence, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to smile and nod when David talked about his plans, his career, or his desire for a family that didn't include me. I didn't have to stand beside him, always in the background, always secondary to his dreams. But that wasn't enough to stop the ache. The ache that came with the broken promises, the shattered trust. I missed the life I had been living, even if that life had been a lie. I missed the dream of us, the vision I had built in my head, until it had all come crashing down in a heap of betrayal and shattered illusions. The first morning I woke up alone in the apartment felt strange. The bed was too big, the silence too loud. I had spent so many years waking up to David's presence next to me, that the emptiness felt almost suffocating. But I wasn't ready to face the truth of my feelings just yet. I wasn't ready to admit to myself that I was grieving, not just the loss of David, but the loss of everything I had believed in. I had spent so long trying to live up to his expectations, that I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten myself. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked different. Older, maybe. But also strangely free. Who am I now? I whispered to my reflection, my voice barely audible. I was no longer his wife. I was no longer the woman who had failed him. I was someone else. Someone who needed to find her way, piece by piece. And that scared me. It terrified me, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his disappointment. I couldn't keep letting him define me. I needed to define myself. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding everyone forever. I had to face my family. My parents, my sister. They had been supportive when I married David, excited about the future we would build together. I could only imagine what they would think of the mess I had made. I dialed my sister Emily's number, my hand trembling. I hadn't told anyone what had happened, not yet. How could I? How could I explain the depth of the betrayal? How could I admit to my family that the man they had once admired had torn me apart? Hey, Rachel. Emily's voice was bright, too bright for what I was about to say. How are you? Have you been working on anything fun? I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to tell her. Emily, I need to talk to you, I said, my voice shaky, the words slipping out like a confession. Something happened. With David. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What's wrong, Rachel? Are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her voice. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. David? He's been seeing someone else. Melissa, my best friend. The words were out before I could stop them, and with them, a floodgate of emotions. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to let my sister hear how broken I was. But I couldn't stop the tears from falling. There was a long silence, and I could hear Emily's sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. Her voice was barely a whisper. Rachel, I don't even know what to say. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to regain some semblance of composure. I don't know how to deal with this, Emily. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like my whole life has been a lie. It's okay. You don't have to figure everything out right now, she said gently. Just take it one step at a time, okay? We'll figure this out. You're not alone. Her words, though comforting, didn't erase the heaviness in my chest, but they did give me a small spark of hope. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I wasn't completely alone. As the days turned into weeks, I started going through the motions of life again. I went back to work, pretending everything was fine. I threw myself into my routine, avoiding the weight of the emotional chaos I was feeling. But the anger, the betrayal, kept creeping up on me. I would be sitting at my desk, answering emails, and suddenly I would remember David's cold, accusatory words. You're useless. Or I would hear the sound of their laughter in my head, the sound of him with her. And the anger would rise up inside me, a fierce fire that I couldn't control. How could they do this to me? I would scream inwardly, feeling the bitterness consume me. How could he do this to me? But then, as quickly as it came, the anger would be replaced by a wave of sadness. The emptiness would return. I would find myself missing him. The way he used to look at me, the way he held me. How could someone go from loving you to destroying you so quickly? It was 3 weeks after everything happened when I found the letter. It was hidden at the back of the drawer in our shared office, underneath the papers I had left untouched for days. The envelope was crisp, unmarked except for my name in David's familiar handwriting. I almost didn't open it. I almost threw it away. But something, perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was the need for closure, drove me to pull it out. I opened the envelope slowly, pulling out the piece of paper inside. My heart pounded as I began to read. Rachel? I've been a fool. I know I've hurt you beyond measure, and there's nothing I can say to undo that. I was blinded by my obsession, by the idea of having a son, of continuing the family name. I never realized how much I had hurt you until it was too late. You are everything I need, and I've let that slip through my fingers. You are the love of my life, and I should never have made you feel like you weren't enough. I could barely finish reading. The words were just words, empty words that meant nothing after everything he had done. But still, I held the paper in my trembling hands, feeling a mix of anger, confusion, and, surprisingly, a twinge of sadness. Was it possible to ever forgive him? Would I ever look at him the same way again? Sometimes, the hardest part of healing is letting go of the pieces of yourself you thought you'd never lose. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost until I started to rebuild. There was a strange kind of silence in the apartment, but it wasn't the same oppressive silence I had felt before. No, this one was different. It was quieter, but not suffocating. It was emptier, but with the possibility of something new, something mine, filling the space. It had been nearly a month since I found the letter from David. A month since he'd tried to apologize, to reach me in the only way he knew how, though it felt like it was too little, too late. I hadn't replied. I hadn't seen him, and I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. But the anger was fading. It hadn't gone completely, but it was beginning to transform into something different, something that made it easier to breathe. I didn't know why I had even bothered to go back to work. Maybe it was the need for normalcy. Maybe it was the fact that I needed something to focus on that wasn't broken. Either way, I walked into the office that morning, feeling like I had just stepped into a parallel universe. Everything was the same, my desk, the steady hum of computers, the distant murmur of my coworkers, but it felt wrong. It felt like I didn't belong anymore. My mind was still filled with the images of David and Melissa. Their betrayal lodged deep inside me, like a splinter that I couldn't remove. I sat down at my desk, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. But as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. The work started to numb the ache. The details of my tasks, the conference calls, the deadlines. They offered me something I hadn't had in weeks: distraction. It wasn't that I didn't care about the work I was doing. It just didn't matter as much anymore. I wasn't doing this for anyone else. Not for David. Not for Melissa. I was doing it for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely lost. Maybe I still had some parts of myself left. After a week of slipping back into my old routine at work, I knew I had to make a choice. The world outside was moving forward, and I couldn't stay stuck. I couldn't keep dwelling on the past, no matter how much it hurt. I had tried for so long to be the perfect wife, to fulfill David's expectations, but in doing that, I had lost myself. And now, as the fog of betrayal began to lift, I saw clearly what I had been missing all along: myself. I needed to focus on me. I needed to rebuild from the inside out. But where would I start? What did I need to let go of? And what did I need to carry forward with me? The phone call with Emily the night after I found David's letter had been an anchor in the storm. She was the only person who knew the depth of my pain, the complexity of my feelings. I couldn't hide from her, even if I wanted to. But that wasn't the point. Emily had always been a safe space for me. She knew David and Melissa as well as I did, and her disappointment mirrored mine when I told her the full extent of what had happened. She hadn't been able to grasp the betrayal at first either. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything I had given up for a man who never saw me. After the phone call, Emily came over to the apartment, sitting on the couch beside me. She didn't ask for details. She just let me talk, and when I stopped, exhausted from speaking my truth, She was there with the quiet understanding I needed. "You have to let go of him, Rach," she said softly. Her words heavy with the weight of all the things unsaid. "You can't keep holding on to a person who never truly saw you for who you are. Not anymore. You deserve so much more than this." I knew she was right. The question was whether or not I could bring myself to let go. I spent the next few days thinking. I thought about David, about all the promises he had made. I thought about Melissa, about all the times she had been there for me. And I thought about what they had both taken from me. I had spent so much time believing that love was supposed to be the answer to everything. That it would heal all wounds, make everything right. But love had failed me. David's love was conditional. Melissa's love was self-serving. And that was when I realized, I didn't need them anymore. Not for closure. Not for validation. I had spent years of my life searching for approval from two people who didn't care enough to see me for who I really was. And so, I made the hardest decision I'd ever had to make. I would let go. Of David. Of Melissa. And of the version of me that had been defined by their expectations. It wasn't easy. It wasn't even close to easy. The first few nights alone in the apartment were unbearable. The loneliness gnawed at me. The silence a constant reminder of what I had lost. But it was in that silence that I found myself. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I joined a yoga class, took long walks through the city, read books I'd always meant to read but never had the time for. I started to rediscover who I was, not as David's wife or as someone's best friend, but as me. For the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel something other than pain, freedom. But of course the road to healing isn't linear. As soon as I began to find my footing, David showed up at my apartment unannounced, his face filled with regret, his eyes pleading. He looked the same, but his presence felt different, distant, almost like he was a stranger. "Rachel, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I know I hurt you. I know I've ruined everything, but I need you to understand. I was lost." I stared at him. The man I had loved for so long. The man who had shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. "I don't want your apologies, David," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding in my chest. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose her over me, and now I have to choose myself." He looked taken aback, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. "Rachel, please. I love you. I always have." I shook my head. "No, David. You loved the idea of me, the version of me that you could mold to fit your image. But that's not me anymore." He stood there, speechless, his hand reaching out as though he could grasp onto the remnants of what we had. But I was no longer his to hold. I had broken free. "Goodbye, David. The hardest part of letting go isn't releasing the person. It's releasing the life you thought you were going to have." The days after David's final visit felt like I was walking through fog. My heart was still raw, and the anger that had been simmering inside me was fading into something quieter, something that felt more like sorrow. But in the quiet, I realized something important. I couldn't continue to hold on to the life I had once envisioned. I couldn't keep living for what had been, for a dream that had shattered before my eyes. I had spent so much of my life waiting to be loved the way I wanted, waiting for David to see me, for him to finally understand me, to love me without conditions. But now, with everything out in the open, I could see the truth. The love I had been seeking was never there. Not from him, not from Melissa. It had been 2 weeks since I had made the decision to let go. 2 weeks since I had seen or spoken to David. And 2 weeks since Melissa had sent me yet another apology text that I had ignored. The silence in my apartment was now not oppressive, but oddly peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. It was strange, but the stillness was comforting. I wasn't running away from my pain anymore. I was simply sitting with it, letting it wash over me in waves. Some moments were harder than others. Some nights the emptiness felt too big to fill. But there was also something liberating about facing that pain head on, rather than hiding from it. I spent my days reading books I hadn't touched in years, journaling my thoughts and attending therapy. Each session left me feeling more grounded, more aware of who I was becoming. I was learning to forgive myself for the things I couldn't control, the choices I had made that had led me to this point. One evening, As I sat by the window watching the sunset, I realized how much I had changed. The woman who had been caught in a cycle of trying to be perfect for someone else, trying to fulfill someone else's dreams, was gone. In her place stood a woman who was still bruised, still raw, but also stronger. I had learned to live for myself. The days felt like small victories. I started to take better care of myself. Physically, emotionally, mentally. I went to yoga classes, not because I wanted to look a certain way, but because it made me feel grounded. I cooked meals for myself, trying new recipes I had always wanted to try. Slowly, I was becoming reacquainted with the person I had once been before David, before the expectations, before everything that had defined me. I had spent so much time focusing on what I couldn't do, what I hadn't been able to give David, that I had forgotten who I was beyond that. I had forgotten that I was more than someone's wife. More than a failed promise. The healing process, though slow and painful, had brought clarity. But nothing prepared me for the moment I would run into David again. I had gone to a coffee shop near my apartment, something I did every Friday morning as a small ritual. I'd sit by the window, drink my latte, and read a book. That morning was no different, until I looked up and saw him standing there. David. He hadn't seen me yet. I had the option to leave, to avoid the confrontation, but something inside me told me I needed to face him, so I sat there, my heart beating in my chest, as I watched him walk toward the counter. For a moment I wondered if I should leave, but before I could make a decision, he turned around and saw me. His face froze, his eyes widening in shock, and for a moment, I saw the same man I had once loved, the same man I had given everything to. He walked over slowly, a hesitant smile forming on his lips. "Rachel," he said, his voice unsure. "I didn't expect to see you here." I didn't respond at first. I just sat there, watching him. He looked different. Older, maybe, but still. There was something familiar about him. Something that made the ache in my chest flare again, though not with the same intensity. "I didn't think you'd want to see me," he continued, shifting uncomfortably. I shook my head. "I don't know if I want to see you, David. But I think it's time we talk." The conversation started awkwardly. We didn't sit at the same table. I couldn't bring myself to do that yet. He sat at the table next to mine, and we spoke in soft, measured tones. He asked about how I was doing, about my life, and I answered in generalities. But we both knew the real reason we were talking wasn't about catching up. David's voice faltered as he spoke. "I've been thinking about everything, Rachel. About what happened, what I did to you." I could hear the remorse in his voice, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough to undo the damage. I had already started to move on, to let go. The pain had faded, but the scar was still there. "You don't get to apologize for this, David," I said, my voice firm but calm. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." He looked down at his hands, rubbing them together nervously. I know, and I regret it every day. I wasn't thinking, I was selfish." I took a deep breath, my chest tightening. This was the man I had loved, the man I had once believed could do no wrong. But the truth was, he had done wrong. And the only thing I could do now was accept it. "I've moved on, David," I said quietly, my voice steady. "And I'm not going to keep waiting for you to fix what you broke. I can't keep doing this to myself." There was a long silence between us. I could see the pain in his eyes, but it didn't change the fact that what he had done was unforgivable. Finally he nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand." We sat in silence for a few moments longer. I wasn't sure what else to say, and I didn't need to say anything more. The man I once knew was gone, and so was the woman I used to be. After David left, I sat there for a while, staring out the window. The weight in my chest wasn't as heavy anymore. I had finally said what needed to be said, and I had walked away from the past. But even with the closure, I wasn't completely free. I still had a lot of work ahead of me. The journey of rediscovery wasn't something that could be rushed. I had spent years defining myself by the men I loved, by the relationships I had built, but now for the first time in my life, I was going to find out who I was, on my own. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft glow over the city. I stood up, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It was a strange feeling, but it was a welcome one. I was finally free. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing is not the scars we see on the outside, but the invisible ones that take longer to heal. The days after my encounter with David felt like the last pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The initial rush of pain and betrayal had subsided, but there was still an ache, a lingering reminder of the love I had given and the life I had lost. The worst part was realizing that I had spent so many years investing everything into someone who wasn't truly invested in me. But with that realization came something else: freedom. I wasn't just free from David, or the life I had built with him. I was free from the expectations that had held me captive for so long. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone but myself. And that scared me. I didn't know who I was without being someone's partner, someone's best friend. But I was about to find out. I decided to take a break from work. The pressure of office life, the endless meetings, the emails, it all felt too much. The weight of everything had been dragging me down, and I realized I needed time to reconnect with myself. I had lived so much of my life trying to make everyone else happy that I had forgotten how to make myself happy. I spent the first few days in solitude, allowing the quiet to fill me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I went for walks in the park, rediscovered old hobbies I had abandoned: painting, writing, yoga. Slowly, I began to feel like I was rediscovering the parts of me that had been lost in the pursuit of someone else's dreams. I enrolled in a weekend art class at a local community center. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never made the time for. When I was with David, everything revolved around his ambitions, his career, his plans. I had put mine on hold, thinking I could always come back to them later. But later never came. And now, it was time to take back those pieces of myself. One day, a few weeks into my healing journey, I decided to go to a cafe near the art center. I wasn't looking for anything, just a quiet moment to reflect and enjoy my own company. But then, I saw him. He was sitting alone at a table by the window, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes focused on the book in front of him. He had an air of quiet confidence, yet something about him felt approachable. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and there was a small scar on his cheek that only added to his rugged charm. I didn't know why I noticed him, but I couldn't look away. There was something in the way he carried himself, a sense of peace, of contentment, that made me feel seen. Not for my relationship with David or my past, but for who I was in that moment. He must have felt my gaze because, after a few moments, he looked up, meeting my eyes with an easy smile. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Mind if I join you?" I was taken aback. It wasn't the usual thing for someone to approach me like this. But there was something in his demeanor that made me feel comfortable. "Sure," I replied, surprised at how easily the words left my mouth. As he sat down, we fell into an easy conversation. He introduced himself as Luke, and we quickly learned we shared a love for books and art. He had a quiet intensity about him that contrasted with the warmth in his eyes. His voice was calming, and I found myself speaking freely. More so than I had in a long time. We talked for hours, sharing stories about our lives, our experiences, and our dreams. I didn't feel like I had to hide anything from him. With every word, I felt the weight of the past lift just a little bit more. Luke didn't know the details of my past, but he didn't need to. There was something about him that made me feel like I was more than just the sum of my past mistakes, more than just a woman who had been betrayed. With him, I was simply me. A few weeks after that day at the cafe, Luke and I started meeting regularly. We'd walk through the park, talk over coffee, and share stories about our lives. He was easy to be around, and the connection between us felt natural, like something that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. But there was still a part of me that was hesitant. I had spent so long focusing on David, on the idea of a future with him, that I was terrified of giving that same kind of energy to anyone else. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let someone else in. The wounds from my past were still raw, and the thought of being vulnerable again scared me. One afternoon, Luke and I were sitting by the river, the sun setting in the distance, casting a soft glow over the water. The conversation turned quiet, and I could feel the tension building, though neither of us had spoken a word about it. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, but I knew it was time to face it. "I'm not looking for anything right now, Luke," I said, my voice soft, almost uncertain. "I'm still working through some things." He didn't look surprised, He simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said. "You don't need to explain. I'm not here to rush you. I just enjoy being with you, Rachel. And I think you deserve happiness, in whatever form that takes." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was no expectation in his eyes, no pressure. Just a quiet kindness that made me feel seen. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't the broken woman I had been just months ago. I was someone capable of healing, of growing, of finding love again, but this time, on my own terms. The days that followed felt like a breath of fresh air. I was still processing everything that had happened, still navigating the emotional maze left by David's betrayal. But now, there was hope. There was a sense that I could move forward, that the future wasn't as bleak as I had once believed it to be. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship, not yet. But, I didn't need to rush. The most important part of this journey was me, learning to love myself again, to understand my own worth, and to take the time I needed to heal. Luke wasn't pressuring me, he was simply there, supporting me without asking for anything in return. And that was enough. I had let go of David. I had let go of the need to be validated by others. And now, I was learning to embrace the future, on my own terms. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to focus on my personal growth. I started painting again, something I had once loved but had abandoned years ago. I began writing, journaling my thoughts and dreams. Slowly, the pieces of myself that had been lost began to come back together. I wasn't defined by the woman who had been betrayed. I was defined by the woman I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for the future. I didn't know what it would hold. I didn't know where Luke would fit into it, or if he would. But I was no longer afraid. I was no longer waiting for something outside of myself to define me. I had everything I needed to rebuild. And I would do it, on my own terms. There's strength in walking away, but there's an even greater strength in walking toward a new life, a new beginning, with hope in your heart. The days had turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the city below, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I had come. The past still lingered in the back of my mind, a faint shadow, but it no longer defined me. I had done the hard work. I had faced my pain, my anger, my heartbreak. I had walked through fire, and though I was scarred, I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more sure of who I was than I had ever been. I had finally found myself again. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Letting go of David had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but it had also been the best thing. It was only in releasing the person who never truly saw me that I was able to see myself, fully, completely, and unapologetically. Despite the progress I had made, I knew there would always be a part of me that would need closure. I wasn't sure if I would ever get the answers I was seeking, but I couldn't keep running from him. I knew that facing David one last time was the final step in my journey of healing. It happened unexpectedly. One afternoon as I was leaving my office, I saw him standing by the sidewalk, waiting. His posture was tense, his face unreadable. For a moment, I almost turned and walked the other way. But I couldn't. I had to face him, not for him, but for me. He saw me approaching, and his eyes softened. "Rachel," he said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't expect you to come." I nodded slowly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I didn't know if I would either," I replied. "But I needed to." "For myself?" David's eyes were full of regret. "I've thought about this every day since everything happened. And I know I can't fix it. I can't undo what I did." I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "No, you can't. And I don't need you to." There was a long pause, and I could see the pain in his eyes, but it didn't faze me anymore. "I thought I needed you to be sorry," I continued. "I thought I needed you to apologize for everything. But what I really needed was to forgive myself." David swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging. "I know," he whispered. "I know you don't need me anymore. But I hope one day, you'll know how sorry I am for everything I did." I took a deep breath, the words coming easier now. "I already do, David. But it's time for me to move on." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. I didn't reach for him. I didn't try to comfort him. This was his journey now. just as mine was mine. "Goodbye, David," I said softly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, I turned and walked away. The next few weeks were filled with small steps, things that seemed insignificant at the time, but later, when I looked back, I realized how much they had contributed to my healing. I reconnected with old friends, enrolled in classes that I had always wanted to take, and began volunteering at a local charity, giving back in ways that filled me with purpose. Luke remained a constant, but in a way that felt healthy and nurturing, without the pressure of rushing into a relationship. We spent time together, but we also gave each other the space to grow individually. He never pushed me, never expected anything. He simply wanted to support me in whatever way I needed. And that was enough. I realized that love, true love, wasn't something that could be rushed or forced. It wasn't about finding someone to fill the gaps of a broken heart. It was about healing and letting love come when you were ready. Not a moment before. One evening, as I walked down the street near my apartment, a soft breeze blowing through my hair, I felt something shift inside me. It was the kind of feeling that whispered to you, quietly, but with immense clarity. I was no longer defined by what happened to me. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I wasn't even the woman who had once loved a man who could never love her the way she deserved. I was Rachel. Just Rachel. And that was enough. I received a call one afternoon from Emily, my sister, who had been my emotional anchor throughout this entire process. She had always been my greatest support, and I had leaned on her heavily in the last few months. "Hey Rachel, I just wanted to check in on you," she said, her voice light but full of warmth. "I'm good," I replied, smiling into the phone. "I'm really good." There was a brief pause before she spoke again, her tone becoming more serious. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I just want you to know, I'm so proud of you. You're stronger than you know." I felt my throat tighten, but I smiled through the lump. "Thanks, Em. I don't know if I'd have made it without you." She laughed softly, the sound comforting. "You would have. You always had it in you. But I'm glad I was there." It was in that moment, with my sister's words echoing in my mind, that I realized something profound. I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. I didn't need David or Melissa to confirm who I was. I was enough, just as I was. The sun was setting as I sat on my balcony, a cup of tea in hand, the cool breeze brushing across my face. The city was alive, but I was at peace. There was no more running, no more hiding from myself. I had faced my fears, my heartbreak, and my own insecurities, and I had emerged from it stronger. Luke had invited me out for dinner that evening. We hadn't talked about the future much, and I wasn't sure what would happen between us. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for whatever came next, whether it was with him or on my own. I wasn't waiting for anyone to complete me. I was complete on my own. I closed my eyes, letting the last of the sunlight kiss my skin. I had come a long way from the woman who had felt lost, betrayed, and broken. I had fought for myself, and I had won. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was ready to face it, on my own terms.